Hello, world history class. Today you guys will be responsible for watching this video, copying the notes from this video onto your Section 3 notes worksheet, and then working on the Martin Luther DBQ, which all can be found right on Canvas. So what we're going to do first is talk about Section 3 notes, the Protestant Reformation. Your goal is to follow along on your note sheet. Write down the notes that show up in this video. You're going to write them right onto your note sheet, and you want to make sure you have this note sheet completed and you understand what's going on in the video so you will be prepared for the Section 3 quiz on Monday, November the 9th, okay? If you have any questions during this short film, you're having trouble understand something, or you're just kind of stuck on certain ideas, please feel free to email me. You are more welcome to email me this week. I will get back to you as soon as I can. And if you I highly suggest to stop and pause the video as you go through so you have enough time to write down this information. Again, I would suggest watching this video at least once or twice to make sure that you have all of the notes onto your Section 3 notes sheet. The substitute is going to need to see those before you can move on to the Martin Luther DBQ. If you guys have any questions, again, please feel free to email me. Feel free to stop and pause the video as you go so you can make sure you have all the note sheet, and I hope you enjoy. So Section 3 is all about the Protestant Reformation, and by the end of this unit, we are going to be able to discuss what the Papal Schism was in the Catholic Church. We're going to be able to identify corruption that's occurring within the Catholic Church. We will be able to identify who Martin Luther is. We're going to be able to answer the question, what were the 95 Theses and how did they lead to the Protestant Reformation? And ultimately, we are going to be able to describe how the Protestant Reformation spread throughout Europe. So just to give you guys an idea of this section we're about to dive into, the Protestant Reformation was the name given to the religious reform movement that divided the Western Church into Catholic and Protestant groups. We see the Papal Schism within the Catholic Church occurring because of corruption and disagreement. So for EQ number 1, what was the Papal Schism within the Catholic Church? Ultimately, the French king, we see him here on the left, he decides that he does not like the Pope because the Pope is claiming that he is more powerful than the king. However, after the Pope dies, the French king holds his own election and selects a new pope who takes residence in Avignon, France. So we see one pope elected, and he is living in a different location. So now the Italians are angry, and at the same time, the Catholic Church was selecting their own pope to live in the Vatican. So now there are two popes. Europe has two popes, and this event is called the Papal Schism because it was a break in the Catholic Church. Countries had to give their allegiance to one of these popes, causing confusion amongst the people as to who the real pope was. This was one of the first signs of corruption in the Catholic Church. We learn that from 1450 to 1520, a series of popes, known as the Renaissance popes, failed to meet the church's spiritual needs. Ultimately now, popes were not necessarily doing their job. The Pope and the church hierarchy were responsible for providing spiritual guidance for the Catholic people. But they were becoming too concerned with politics and becoming wealthy. They were using their power in the wrong ways. And so we see the popes and the church hierarchy, the system, begin to manipulate and change spiritual practices to fit alongside their political agendas. One example of changing the spiritual practices to fit with these new political agendas was the selling of indulgences. And indulgences is pretty much a release from all or part of the punishment for a sin. So when you think of indulgence, people are buying these tangible objects to help reach salvation. In salvation, this term is also known as kind of acceptance to heaven within the Christian religion. So now we see the Pope and the church hierarchy system selling indulgences to help people reach salvation. Ultimately, what they're trying to say is that if you buy an indulgence or you have an indulgence, you will be more likely to be accepted to heaven. And so the Catholic Church starts selling relics. And these are objects believed to have religious power, which will help grant people an indulgence. As you can see, there's an example of 2 relics there on the bottom. They could be medallions or any type of really tangible objects. So now the process of obtaining salvation becomes almost mechanical. Their collections of relics grow more popular as a means to salvation. So now people are buying more and more tangible objects. They're buying relics in order to have an indulgence, to have this clean slate. So no longer is the church really doing what it's supposed to be doing. People are no longer practicing good needs. They're simply saying, if I sin, that's okay, because I can buy a relic and it will grant me an indulgence. It will grant me a clean slate from my sins, and I will be able to have religious salvation. I will be able to be accepted into heaven. And so this is where a lot of corruption stems from within the Catholic Church. Although this practice went against the traditional Catholic teachings, we see it making a lot of money for the Catholic Church. So on to EQ number 3. Who was Martin Luther? Well, he is a Catholic monk and a professor in Wittenberg in the Holy Roman Empire. Through his study of the Bible, Luther arrived at an answer to this problem about what the corruption going on in the church and what should be done about this corruption. He says the certainty of salvation that had bothered him since he had become a monk. This idea about salvation, can you buy indulgences? Can you buy relics to grant you salvation, to accept you into heaven? He says this cannot be possible. In Luther's opinion, human beings were powerless in the sight of an almighty God and could never do enough good works to earn salvation. He believed that we could not stand up to this religious figure, that simply buying relics and granting indulgences was not enough. He disagreed with that corruption. We see Martin Luther having more traditional beliefs about the church. He believed the Bible was the sole source of religious truth and that salvation comes from one's faith in God. This idea that salvation comes from one's faith in God is called justification by faith alone. And this becomes the chief teaching of the Protestant Reformation. Martin Luther uses the Bible as a source of religious truth. He presents his ideas in a document called the 95 Theses. And this becomes the foundations for the Protestant Reformation. Martin Luther's protest of indulgences began the Protestant Reformation. The Catholic Church had authorized the selling of indulgences to raise money. But those who were encouraged by Luther believed that indulgences only soothed the conscience. They did not forgive sins. He believed that, okay, maybe if you sell relics and grant indulgences, this is only to soothe one's conscience, to make them feel okay about the sins that they committed. But ultimately, they do not forgive sins. And so we're going to see Martin Luther write his 95 Theses, and his intent was to open a dialogue on abuses in the Catholic Church. So he's going to talk about the corruption, and we will see that in EQ number 4. So EQ number 4, what were the 95 Theses, and how did they lead to the Protestant Reformation? Well, on October 31st, 1517, we see Martin Luther post his 95 Theses on the church door. He had many concerns about the practices of the Catholic Church. So he composed a list of complaints about the practices of the church and posted them to the Wittenberg church door on October 31st, 1517. This list of complaints was called the 95 Theses and addressed practices including the selling of indulgences, the belief that the clergy should be able to marry, and that there should be 2 sacraments, baptism and communion. So ultimately, the thesis, this was a list of his complaints. He's complaining that the Catholic Church should not sell indulgence. He's saying, stop selling relics, stop granting indulgences. That is not the way to heaven. That is not the way to gain salvation. And he further argues that there should be 2 sacraments, baptism and communion, and that the clergy should be able to marry. Martin Luther's 95 Thesis was a stunning attack on the abuses of the sale of indulgences. Thousands of copies were published, and this spread his ideas to all parts of Germany and all throughout Europe. Martin Luther will later create a new sect of religion known as Protestantism, and this event will be known as the Protestant Reformation. Okay, so moving on to EQ number 5. How did the Protestant Reformation spread throughout Europe? Well, Protestantism begins to spread due to the printing press. We learned back in section 1, the printing press is able to duplicate copies of works and documents very, very quickly. And so we see Martin Luther's ideas being spread throughout Northern and Western Europe due to the invention of the printing press. We see a lot of people reading these new ideas and being encouraged and inspired to create their own new Protestant church. So here is a map. There's a picture of Martin Luther. Here's a map to give you an idea of his religious sect. So Martin Luther is responsible for creating Lutheran. And Lutheran is pretty much just the religion that Martin Luther practices. He's saying, you know, we should not sell indulgences, and we should include baptism and communion within our religion. So we see this small portion, Germany, as Lutheran, and the rest of Europe in the yellow as Roman Catholic. So still a large majority of people within the European Empire are Roman Catholics. Here's another map just to give you an idea of some of the religious sects that will be spread during this time period. And so with the spread of his ideas, we see new sects of Protestantism emerge. Again, the first one is Lutheranism, and this becomes the first Protestant faith created by Martin Luther himself. The second is Calvinism, and Calvinism is created by John Calvin. He is educated in France, and we see John Calvin preaching this idea of predestination. This means that God has predestined some people to be saved, known as the elect, and some people to be damned. So Calvinism is a new sect of Protestantism. The Anglican Puritans we'll see primarily in England, and Presbyterianism in Scotland. Also, the Huguenots will be primarily in France, and the Anabaptists will be located in Netherlands. The Anabaptists, this last group here, they believed in a complete separation of church and state. So we see these new sects of Protestantism emerging during this time period. As the Reformation spread, different forms of Protestantism emerged throughout Europe, and these are examples of some of the different forms we will see. While Protestantism becomes very popular throughout Europe, Roman Catholicism is still the dominant religion. So as we see here, this yellow, Roman Catholic, this is still primarily the main religion. So it's still dominant. People are still listening to the Pope. A large majority of people are still listening to the Pope. However, in response to the growth of Protestantism, though, the Catholic Church tries to reform its corrupt practices and bring back its old ways. What they're trying to do now is get rid of selling these relics and practice good faith. Ultimately, what they want to do is to reform the corrupt practices to bring back more faith to the Catholic Church. So we see kind of our own Catholic Reformation. The Catholic Church revitalizes in the 16th century to give it new strength and enable it to regain much of the power that it had lost during the Protestant Reformation. So we see a lot of changes made within the Catholic Church to bring back its followers that had left to go to the Protestant Reformation. All right, so that concludes the notes for section 3. To give you a little bit more information, I have included in this video a section of John Green, and he's going to talk to you about the Protestant Reformation. I highly suggest watching this video. I think it gives a lot of great information, and it's attached right here. So all you have to do is sit back, relax, and listen to the rest of the video. Thank you.